Hi, Kate. Thank you so much for joining us today. Um, Firstly, I just want to know a little about yourself and your interest and involvement in device theater.
Um, well, honestly, I think I was doing it before it was called that, or I knew what that was. I'd never heard that phrase. And probably, I don't know. I'm from St. John's, Newfoundland. So people there, the artists there, performing artists often work interdisciplinarily. They themselves have many disciplines, or they collaborate, with people from different disciplines to make work, and that's quite normal there. And um when I first started doing professional theater in Ontario, I was in Toronto, and I found that for the most part, people were always kind of asking me, "Well, what are you? What are you?" And there was a sense of like confusion, and also because I was really a young, artist at the time, and I really did need advice. So no flies on the people who were asking me that question. But there was some sense of like, are you a writer or a dancer or an actor? Or a costume designer, like, what are you? And I always found that confusing. And I guess that might have been because of my formative years being in a place where that was quite normal to work that way. And maybe because my initial training was actually in dance. So I've always kind of gone at things physically first, and especially for the performance work, my body is working out what I'm doing along with the other, text and, images and all the rest of it. So I think what has happened is the rest of the world is caught up to Newfoundland and Labrador. That's not true. But I think in other parts of the world, this kind of collaboration between art forms just has, different histories in different parts of the world. But I think that the sort of siloization of performance art forms is something pretty unique to the first world, Western world, colonialism, etc. So I think it's a really good thing that we're seeing more of this, and if you have to have a word like physical theater was the first phrase I heard. And then now it's more often called devised theater. And I kind of like devised theater because all theater is physical. And devised theater sort of just really has right in the title of it. This is something we make together. It's collaborative.
That's really interesting. So with anxiety, as we've just talked, your background is very multidisciplinary, and anxiety is very autobiographical, what I understand. So how did that come to be?
I'd always had in my mind that I was going to read Beowulf, the old English epic poem. And so I was like, oh, I have time now. I'll start reading it. And I noticed a lot of things right away. One was that I couldn't read Old English. It's not really hard. People like spend their whole, careers like being a specialist in Old English, and why I thought I could read it, kind of a ignorance is bliss moment. And then I realized how hard it was going to be, but I had the time. So I started really digging in and like reading all these different parallel translations and comparing them. And, English is such a strange language because and again, I'm speaking as somebody who really knows almost nothing about it, but I now know this much more than I did before I started reading Beowulf. So the thing about English is that um English is like this language that is an invader, like we sort of have forced it on the world. And yet it's a language that really is made out of the tongues of the invaders of England, so the Norse and the Anglo-Saxons were invaders, and then the Normans came in and they brought French, and most English words are in fact from French, but the Normans actually were Norse. They had lost their language, started speaking French. So it's all really fascinating to me, and then, yeah, the Romans, of course. So it feels like in some weird way, because language really, is a way of thinking. And that's why, languages that are in danger of disappearing, it's so important that we do something about that. Because you lose a whole way of thinking. So I think it's really important that we English speakers who are imposing our language on everybody else, like we need to know what it is. And I didn't. So, and I'm a writer. So, I have 6 novels out or something and a bunch of short stories, and I've been writing for theater for a long time. So yeah, so it was kind of the beginning of my exploration of the language. And then what happened as I was reading it is I started noticing my emotional reactions. And one thing that kept coming up was my father, because my father was a lexicographer. And I didn't really want to do any work about my father at all. Like I just really resisted that idea, and I just didn't want to go there. And but of course, I know now at this point in my career, because I've been doing this for a while, that really you know, I don't really do good work when I'm comfortable and all like comforting myself with my work. Like that's not usually my good work. So I forced myself to keep following that line of thought. And sort of digging into the sort of Norse ancestry, which is something one of my, I think almost every family has at least one family member who's really interested in the genealogy of the family, right? And in my family, on my dad's side anyway, it was his older sister, my Aunt Jan, and she worked out this whole family tree, and she managed to trace us, or one thread of us, back to some Norse people. So yeah, I just started unpacking that a little bit as well. So yeah, then I got a little bit of funding. So this is important because often people don't, artists even don't want to talk about money, but the fact is we do need money to make work. And so I got some support. So I was able to rent a venue and gets Ryan Kerr to be my director, and then Marie-Josée Chartier also came in, and Patty Shaughnessy also. I was able to pay them to come in, and I was able to pay Carl Orzechowski to make music. And so then I started just you start noticing what you notice, and I started noticing these different like visual arts artists who were doing stuff that looked like wreckage, and like a plague had happened, or this terrible apocalypse had occurred. And so that started informing the visuality of the piece for me. And then also, of course, with this idea of whiteness. So I had this idea of the set being white, because it just like picking up on this Beowulf, Norse, white, all this kind of stuff. And also the house I grew up in was built by my great-great-grandfather, which is unusual in North America anyway. And his last name happened to be White as well. It all just started coming together, and I got to do this sort of workshop, which ended up being pretty more realized than workshops often are. But it felt like it was the only way I could make the work, was to do my best with the script I had at the time.
And what was the process of retrospect like?
But the thing is I've done work that kind of delved into my own life before, both at my prose writing and performance. So it doesn't make it easier that I've done it before, but I know that in the past, when the more specific I get, the more other people are able to relate to it, weirdly, And so as much as it makes me queasy and scared, I feel like I know that just to have a bit of faith and just continue to put one foot in front of the other and keep doing it. And yeah, I'm having revelations, I must say. And this always happens to me with everything, whether it's a novel or short stories or writing for theater. It's like my artist self knows I need to explore something before I fully know what it is. I can't explain that. And that's happening with this piece. So there's something I'm working out, and I don't know what it is yet, and maybe, no, I don't know for sure that I'll know after I've done the show, but maybe I will.